Hey everyone, hope I caught you doing well. Jaren here as always, and I can't wait to bring you my first ever video essay on this channel. It's something I've been wanting to do for quite a while. I just had to have the right idea in mind, but finally I decided I'm going to talk about a film that I'm extremely passionate about, Dr. Sleep. This film came out today, a year ago. So I figured what better way to talk about it than to bring you out my first ever video essay talking about an extensive part of the film that I think a lot of people just sort of glossed over, but I really appreciated. So without further ado, I really hope you guys enjoy this, but it's time for my very first video essay. Here we go. Director Mike Flanagan has made more than a name for himself within the horror genre as someone who understands how to connect on many levels with the themes most popular today, as well as what has made the genre so beloved for decades, following in the footsteps of the greats such as Alfred Hitchcock and Stanley Kubrick. Like most filmmakers, Flanagan grew a connection to the storytelling and structure of a well-crafted ghost story, but over time has found his own personal approach to horror that, for myself, is what I've waited on since I could remember. Of course, with great staples of the genre like Psycho, The Exorcist, and Jaws that even heavily rely on the establishment of characters and their personal trauma, there are more so those films such as A Nightmare on Elm Street and The Texas Chainsaw Massacre that worry more about cheap thrills and overabundance of gore, presenting characters more as pawns in a game than important pieces to a story. Something Mike Flanagan has done incredibly well since his first major film, 2011's Absentia, is the depth of human emotion and the different ways an individual can process trauma. He very importantly understands the value in telling a character's story, and that sometimes the true horror is what lies within, not necessarily what jumps out at you from within a dark shadow or an eerie establishment.
Well, I think the supernatural elements, if they're done in their best expression, they grow completely out of the character, and then that way, they're really just kind of a metaphorical storytelling tool that you're examining this family or this person or addiction or recovery, and the supernatural element that he's painted onto it. That's really just a way to turn up the volume on it and to look at it in a much more kind of an intense scrutiny. But yeah, I think that's a lesson that Stephen King taught me when I was just a very young reader, and I've always held on to that.
A great example of Flanagan's human approach to horror is 2019's Dr. Sleep, the follow-up coming nearly 40 years after the beloved classic 1980's The Shining from Stanley Kubrick, and as you can expect, Flanagan was faced with a pretty daunting task, tackling a property that is widely regarded as one of, if not the greatest horror film ever made, as well as having to do his best at pleasing the mastermind behind the stories, author Stephen King, who, funny enough, is notorious for not being a fan of Stanley Kubrick's take on his novel. Flanagan previously mentioned he has had an immense fascination with the materials from a very early age, watching The Shining in spite of his parents' wishes as a child, eventually reading the book in high school, and then discovering the story of Dr. Sleep later in life. He quickly realized that while Kubrick captured the essence of King's story, there was still more to be desired. Possibly why Stephen King frowned upon The Shining as an adaptation is that it overlooked many key aspects of the entire narrative that he felt were important to truly express the full meaning of the evil within the Overlook Hotel. Mike Flanagan knew he had to both show respect to Kubrick's work, as well as right the wrongs and add the necessary expansion to King's narrative to add closure and hopefully please the man himself. So then comes the film, which explores the sequel, Dr. Sleep, following the events that occurred after The Shining, but more importantly, the lasting impact the events had on Danny Torrance. Still not fully grasping what occurred within the doors of the Overlook Hotel, one thing's for certain, which is Jack Torrance was a man of addiction who had trouble containing a sense of self-control, and as many things are, These addictive tendencies were carried over to Danny, who we see in the very beginning of Dr. Sleep, heavily depressed and drugged up around women he most likely has no recollection of how they ended up at his apartment. As he looks at himself in the mirror, the struggle and trauma is written in bulk across his face. Especially through the first act, we see Danny ruggedly trudging through life, but without the ability to shake his inner demons and the memories of his father from when he was a child. He's at rock bottom, unsure of what step to take next. How can he possibly move forward when his past continues to hold him back? But through his perseverance and the help of a young friend he soon meets, Abra, a girl who he discovers shares the same ability to shine, Danny begins his journey to recovery.
I'm thinking about my dad. He died when I was 5, so the only way I got to know him, really got to know him, was when I went dark, when I drank to dull but now, I get to know him a little different, because he also stood in a room like this once, wanting to get well for me and my mom. And he held a chip in his hand, and that chip said 5 months. And on that day, before it all, well, on that day, all he wanted in the world was to stand where I'm standing now. And here I am. So thank you for us both, I guess. This is for Jack Torrance.
With every case of addiction, often the ones that stand out among the rest are the stories that end in recovery and restoration. The hardest thing to do, and the most important step, often cliched in every film set inside of an addiction support group, is to admit you have a problem. While cliche, it's incredibly accurate. And when Danny begins to realize his true calling, he's able to finally push forward. Using his past struggles with drug and alcohol abuse, as well as the perceived abuse put onto Danny from his father, he begins to share his experiences with others as an encouragement, as well as gain a closer relationship with this girl who he can very easily connect to, because he knows the last thing he wants her to feel, like he did personally, is alone. The importance of them sharing the ability to shine is detrimental, as they each have an outlet for support and guidance. This story wholly moves on its own like a rushing wind. Much like the work of Kubrick, Flanagan structures this film with an unsettling tone that presents the idea that while things seem to be getting better, it's really only the calm before the storm. Sadly, oftentimes part of the journey when overcoming addiction is relapse. In Dr. Sleep, while not fully presenting itself as such, the story's villain, Rose the Hat, is definitely crafted in that light. Eat well, stay young, live long is the motto Rose the Hat claims to live by, and while at first thought this sounds very relatable, the intent behind this character is far more sinister. Like many tempting things, Rose, on the outside, looks incredibly welcoming, attractive, and caring. She's the ultimate adventurer, always up for a good time, excellent survivor skills, and has a gathering of people who follow her like a leader. But we learn early on that her motives are all incredibly selfish and only for the well-being of herself, and while beneficial to her, it only breaks those down around her. Packaged in a neat box, extremely persuasive, and addictively crushing. Just like addiction, the more you let her in, the more she latches on and sucks out every ounce of life left inside of you. When Abra and Danny become entangled in a mission to stop Rose and her gang from taking the lives of innocent bystanders, soon she becomes enticed in Danny and his inner demons. Using what she can against him, subtly all the trauma once again begins to appear, and while not being swept up into the addiction of drugs and alcohol, the memories of his childhood dark times start to rear their ugly head once again. Suddenly, a lot is at stake. Danny has lost his best friend, has put Abra in danger, and is forced to go back to the source of all his pain, the Overlook Hotel. During this painful last encounter, he's confronted by everything that consumed his father and eventually himself. The hotel becomes alive, revealing once more the evil inside, and through it, Danny more than ever has to maintain a steady mind to achieve the goal, which is to burn the Overlook Hotel to the ground. In the process, Rose the Hat is on her way to finish him off. He is perceived now as broken down and weak, portraying the perfect sacrifice for Rose to consume, But what she doesn't know is just how strong he really is at this moment. Throughout all of the therapy, treatment, recovery, the one thing Danny never did was confront the problem head on, until now. Burning down the Overlook Hotel is not only important because of what lies within the building, but it also signifies that for Danny, the door to access his past memories and trauma is now locked, and he threw away the key. And because of this revelation, Rose no longer has the ability to feed off him, since what was once his addiction has finally been overcome for ultimate redemption. While on the surface this is an obvious horror film, underneath lies much more to uncover. This is a character study, a personal trial, a fully earned path to redemption that expresses the importance of relationship, perseverance, and self-confidence. And for just the icing on the cake, all came together to become a film that Stephen King absolutely loved, as did myself, and sealed Mike Flanagan's place among the greats in the horror realm.
Midnight were the stars and you. Midnight and a rendezvous.